Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another wonderful tasting with the Virtual Tasting Society. My name is Vadim Perlovsky, and today we're excited to welcome one of my favorite Scotch distilleries in the world, uh, the Balvenie. Today, joining us is Brett Bailey. He is the West Coast brand ambassador for the Balvenie. Welcome. Thank you very much for being here. We have an exciting lineup. As we discussed before we hit record, we opted to skip the classic 12 Doublewood because we assume everybody already has one in their collection, or if they don't, they should. But we have some really fantastic expressions in front of us and some new releases to the brand. So we did a dinner with Brett a couple of months ago, which was spectacular. Thank you for coming out for that, and thank you for making your time for us tonight. We're excited to taste these and learn about the brand. Some of the people here aren't in the state, weren't able to make the dinner, and I see some faces that were at dinner and back again. So, welcome, Brett. Thank you. Please introduce yourself, tell us about the brand, and take it away.
Sure. So my name is Brett Bailey. I am, as mentioned, the West Coast ambassador for Balvenie. I've been with the company now since 2019, the early part of that year. So right before COVID, I used to be based in Singapore, covered Southeast Asia, had 6 countries under my purview there, but that didn't mean the company wouldn't send me elsewhere because anything that they can send us out for, they will. So I used to cover Hong Kong when I was lucky enough to get out to Honkers Bonkers. I've done events out in Dubai, Sweden. Been very fortunate to represent some beautiful brands, originally starting with Glenfiddich and then now progressing over to Balvenie after doing a joint role out in Southeast Asia for the last 3.5 years that I was there. So we have a fun little lineup that's going to show us a little bit of the flexibility, if you will, that the Balvenie has. We're not just your standard distillery. We have a few things that we get to flex on the rest of the market with. A lot of that to do with the distillery itself and how we actually produce our whiskey. But yeah, excited to be here.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. So we are tasting, for those of you following along at home, we're tasting the 12 single barrel, 12 American oak, 14 Caribbean cask, 14 stories, 16-year French oak, and 21 Portwood. And you said we're going to go a little bit different from the order we assumed. What's going to be the order?
Yes, so what we're going to do is the only change that I have to that lineup is to put the 14 stories as the very last.
Okay.
And there's rhyme behind the reason, or reason behind the rhyme, whichever way it works. Uh, we'll get to the story behind why that is a little bit of a potentially volatile whiskey when we get there, but it's an interesting component. It says in the notes that we have here on the chat that the 14 is slightly peated. That could be a lot more peated than expected or a lot less, and it's because it's a single barrel. But I'll tell the reasoning why that is once we get there.
Awesome. Okay, cool.
Very good. All right, so should we jump straight into, I guess, a little bit of history about the Balvenie to start off?
Please.
The distillery has been around since 1892. So anyone that's got a Balvenie in front of them, that will be printed on the top of the lid. The weird thing for us is that when it comes to Glenfiddich, which was the original brand that the family started back in 1887, we claim 1887, even though the distillery started being built in 1886. If you didn't know, we are still family owned. We're now fifth generation owned and operated. William Grant was a guy. He and his wife Elizabeth, back in 1886, made the decision for him to leave the Mortlach distillery. He worked there for about 19 years. It was the first time he'd ventured into the whiskey industry. Started out as the bookkeeper, and very quickly in the first 12 months, they recognized that he was quite a savvy business operator. So he moved to become the general manager or distillery manager within that first 12 months. He worked there for 19 years. Started saving every penny. I'm sure we all know that the Scots are very thrifty, is probably the best way that I can put that without getting too Australian. And so they saved as much as they could. And after 19 years working for the Mortlach, William Grant, very famously within the company, his words were recorded by the family, turned and said, I'm going to go down the road and make the best dram in the valley. Now, his intention behind that is what became Glenfiddich. So he chose the location for that distillery based on his childhood. When William Grant was about 7 years old, he started herding cattle through the Highlands. It was a way for him to make money. At some point in his life, he also took on a little bit of his dad's trade as a cobbler. So he was mending shoes and so on and so forth, but came back to the whiskey industry. And an important thing for us, as we all know, is a water source. So same thing for herding cattle. He knew where there were really strong springs for him to take the cattle to when they needed that water source. So he discovered the Robbie Spring, which is still the only water source that we put inside a bottle of Glenfiddich. It is production water versus processed water. All of our processed water comes from the River Fiddick itself. It runs behind the distillery. It cools all of the cooling towers. If you ever go there and wash your hands, that's coming from the River Fiddick. Thankfully, the family has, I don't know what Henrik just did, but that was amazing. I hope you got it. But thankfully, the family has put a lot of money into preserving the environment around us to the point that we are 100% off the grid when it comes to our electricity and our water. Whatever water we return to the River Fiddick is through some process that allows it to go back in there actually cleaner than when it comes to us. But yeah, we were very fortunate that he had this knowledge of where the water source was. Now, William Grant made his first sale very confusingly to a gentleman called William Williams in 1888. It was February 8th as well, exactly 100 days in one day, sorry, 100 years in one day before I was born. So I was almost born to do this. But William Grant made the sale to a gentleman called William Williams. Obviously, the names got a little confusing, and a condition of the sale was that he had to put a brand or a label to the whiskey that he was selling, which is where Glenfiddich, Valley of the Deer, was first established. For that point of sale, the distillery was born. William Williams took it down to his blending house, started selling it out, basically started building the name for the new make spirit that William Grant was making. And within about 3 years, being very forward thinking, William Grant realized he was going to run out of liquid pretty quickly because the demand was going to be higher than the supply. So again, going back to his thrifty nature, instead of spending all the money to get additional materials to build out another distillery space, extra buildings before buying even the equipment in was going to become expensive. And so sure enough, on a day he was probably standing out there sipping on a dram, looked down through the valley and kind of took note of the fact that there was this building that he'd been looking at for years that had been abandoned for 150 years at that point called Balvenie New House. Sure enough, he realized that he could probably retrofit an entire distillery from top to bottom, grain at the top, liquid out the bottom. And that's what they did. They took over Balvenie New House, established the Balvenie Distillery, which at the time was also called Glenfiddich number two. They had no ambition for this to be a second distillery going in. So when they first tasted the new make spirit, they realized because Balvenie has always operated on a unison double still setup, so a wash still to a spirit still, Glenfiddich, on the other hand, having bought ex Cardew stills, had a wash still to two spirit stills. It was providing a different profile to the new make. If anyone's ever had the fortunate opportunity to sample the new make spirit, hopefully it means you were at the distillery because if it's out there, someone stole it. But Glenfiddich new make tastes very fruit driven. So the first time I sampled it, it was at about 71.24%. It was very, very volatile on the label, but when you sampled it, it tasted more along the lines of like an eau de vie, like an unaged grape spirit. If you look at the Balvenie, on the other hand, we get this very malty, honeyed flavor that comes through. So the Glenfiddich labeling was never going to work. We've got a totally different base spirit. As soon as you put that into a cask and it starts evolving, 71.24, well, sure, not very exact. Yeah, look, I mean, who's in it for the details, right? Essentially, what we see, though, is this really different profile of the whiskey. And this is going way back. We've obviously got a different profile to the new make now. We do peat a lot of the whiskeys that come out of Balvenie because we do have the capacity to do so, but we do it in a way that is not even registerable. So we don't declare any ppm in there. I think the last time I spoke to the distillery team, we're peating the 12-year-old Doublewood as an example to about 2 ppm when it comes to grain. All of that's going to fall out for the most part. So you get this very wispy kind of peated note that comes through in the 12 Doublewood at the back end. So unless you're super sensitive to it or really looking for it, you're not going to see it. If you look at the Glenfiddich 12, on the other hand, very, very clean, very vibrant sort of apple and pear flavors, all of the distillery DNA, that sort of distillery character coming through from the fermentation. So that's where they realized we have two different things. Why not name it after the house that it was built in? And that's what we have. So Balvenie was born. Again, going back to it, Glenfiddich, we talk about 1886 as the foundation date of the distillery, but they really claim 1887, which was the production date because they first saw liquid coming off the stills Christmas Day of 1887. For some reason on Balvenie, we print 1892, which is when they theoretically started building the distillery, but we started producing in 1893. So fun facts for the whiskey nerds. Anyone else is just going to go like, cool, man, let's drink some juice, which we're going to get to. So not that much happened with Balvenie between then and about 1971. 71 is about the first time we really saw any number of cases coming out of the distillery in the format of single malt versus just new make going out into the world. I was corrected on this recently. Last year, I was in Paris for Whiskey Live's 20th anniversary. Went to this beautiful bar. If anyone's in Paris, highly recommend going to the Golden Promise. It is an incredible place to go through for archival bottlings. We're chatting to their curator, the guy that runs the program. Um, and sorry, I'm just reading Jane's note. The Curious Cask, because the label is too small for the name on the bottle. Excellent. We'll get to that one in a minute. But Golden Promise was in there, and the gentleman I was chatting to him, he said, "Yeah, so 1974, the first really commercial volumes came out, but there's a few examples from prior too." He said, "Well, let me show you something." And he pulled out a bottle, as with all the ambassadors from around the world, and he pulled out a round green glass bottle that was Balvenie. It was a 6-year-old from 1966. I'd never heard of this whiskey ever before. And it became very clear pretty quickly why, because the family sounds like they might have scrubbed that from our marketing archives. On the neck of the bottle, it has a very distinctive label that says whiskey specifically made for ladies. And it was meant to be this beautiful, vibrant, fruit-driven, really young, different time in the whiskey world and marketing worlds. So I did get to sample it. It was a really interesting dram, but nothing to do with the Balvenie that we know now. So there are examples that predate that 71 to 74 period. Now, I keep referencing 74 for a good reason. Hopefully, all of you have heard of David Charles Stewart. Pretty important figure in the Scotch whiskey industry at large. Important in the world of spirits in general, because he's done a few things over the course of his tenure, which currently is in its 63rd year. He still works for us. I keep making the mistake of, when David departed, when David left. David's still very much alive. After 60 years working for the distillery in 2022, he decided it was time for him to retire from the malt master role. And he now operates as a honorary brand ambassador, is his official title. So when David first started with us, it was 1962. He was a stock clerk. He was 17 years old, didn't know anything about whiskey. And sure enough, he had 2 other job offers. One was something and the second was another. It didn't matter because he immediately said, "I've got this opportunity with a whiskey distiller. Let's move forward into that." And thank God he did. So David joined us as a stock clerk. He was working under the tutelage of a gentleman called Hamish Robertson, who was the master blender for William Grant and Sons as a whole. He was responsible for the 1963 release that came to the US that launched single malt, as we now know it, into the global market. He also was responsible for blending Grants, previously known as Standfast. So David went in there, pretty shy little teenager, was learning all the bits and pieces about whiskey distillation, whiskey blending. And essentially at that point, it was an art over a science. They didn't have the chemistry degrees that we see from Brian Kinsman and Kelsey McKechnie now. It was very much about, do you nose, do you taste? Is it working to what you want to see? So David, basically a very polite, very soft-spoken individual, unless he's got about 12 Guinnesses in him. Sat in the room, he would pull samples, he would help nose, he would help taste, and they identified pretty quickly had a great sort of palate on him. So they wanted to keep him close to Hamish as he went through. And in 1974, someone walked up to Hamish when he was probably at the pub, waved a couple extra quid in front of him, said, "Why don't you come and make some whiskey for us? We'll pay you a bit more." His Scottish intuition of being thrifty and more money is more money decided to depart down the road. I actually don't know because I've never asked the question where he went. But sure enough, David probably peeked over his shoulder, saw what was happening, put his head down, and just kept doing the thing, blending more whiskeys. So David was never meant to be the guy, which I find a really fascinating note that we're now talking about the single most experienced malt master in the Scotch whiskey game. And it got to a point that I was at the distillery a couple of years ago, and Andy Fairgraves, if anyone's been to the distillery, Andy is a very distinctive character. He has dreadlocks that go down to about the bottom of his ass cheeks, very thick Doric accent, and wears a beret at all times. Formerly an artist, and he's now the archivist at the distillery. He's been with us for about 27 years. And he showed me a piece of paper from the archives which had David's name when they were going through the search for about 6 months trying to find a replacement for Hamish. And it says in someone's handwriting that David, quotes, might do. They had zero faith in the guy. It was, I don't know. I guess he's already here. We're already paying him. Let's just put him in the role and see what happens. Fast forward to 2022, we've got the only malt master that I know of in the spirits industry, in the global community, that has what I like to call a bookended cask. David is registered as having laid down whiskey in 1962 at 17 years old into a cask, and in 2022 was registered as the one pulling it out, signing it off, and releasing it as a 60-year-old Balvenie that had sit in that cask for 60 years. So pretty wild sort of trajectory for him to go on, given the fact the family didn't expect him to be the guy. Now, we are getting to the whiskey drinking point, I promise. And in the one thing I've learned in the almost 2 years that I've been in the US, possession is 9/10 of the law. I was corrected that that is written in a law book somewhere, but it's not actually legally binding. But the whiskey's in your hands, so if you decide to jump ahead, that's totally fine. It's just I'm hoping you got extra bottles to top your glass off afterwards. Now, David is credited as a pioneer of the industry, an innovator. He went through a period up until 2009, sorry, where he was doing double duty. He was the master blender and malt master of the entire company until Brian Kinsman came in and took over in 2010 as the malt master of Glenfiddich. But in 1983, David did something that kind of shook the earth, where he was the first person to ever do cask finishing in a commercial release. If anyone has Glenlivet friends, I know that they will argue this point. And yes, they were experimenting at the time, but first to the line is the one that wins. And we were the first ones to release under the Balvenie a commercial cask finished whiskey. Now, David never lets us describe him as the creator. Again, very humble, very soft spoken individual. And so David likes to be called the pioneer because he's convinced somewhere in the 400 plus year existence of distillation in Scotland, someone let whiskey sit in a barrel as we know it now, and maybe it started leaking, or maybe they said, well, I'm sick of that one, let's move it into another. So he doesn't want to take their thunder. We don't know who that person would have been, but sure enough, we call him the pioneer. So 1983, he releases an early version of what we now know as the Doublewood. It was 10 years in a bourbon cask and then 6 months in an Oloroso sherry cask. We retained that for about 10 years. And then in 1993, to celebrate the centenary of the distillery, he bumped it up to a 12-year age statement with 9 months in Oloroso. So there's the history lesson. Hopefully at some point we learn something. And if not, that's okay. We have whiskey to forget. So what we're going to do is jump straight into the unfinished, the Balvenie 12-year-old single barrel. Now, as I mentioned, I was living in Singapore for a while. We didn't get any single barrel liquids out there. So I had to enviously sit and see all of my mates from the company talking about how great this liquid is. It's a really wonderful thing for us to try whiskeys that are a younger age statement. I'm very fortunate. My uncle is an ambassador of mezcal and tequilas, has brought me up drinking mostly blancos. And it was a really good education for me before moving into the whiskey space, because for me, younger whiskey is comparable to like a Blanco tequila. This is where we're going to taste the DNA of the distillery, all of that distillery character, the things that no one else can recreate. Anyone can buy the barrels, be it they're working with the Kelvin Cooperage or have their own suppliers. We can compare wood notes the entire time. But this is where we're talking about grain styles chosen, spirit stills, wash stills, fermentation levels, all of the elements that happen before we ever compare the wood. So I'm going to do my best pretend, because I showed the team before that I'm on a slightly heavier whiskey. But if we bring this up to the nose, look at that. It's almost like I'm professional. If we bring this up to the nose, what we're looking for is really, I guess, signature Balvenie tasting notes, but mixed in with what we expect from a bourbon cask. So the single barrel will never make over 300 bottles out of a single cask when it comes to the bourbon. We're sitting at a 12-year age statement. So up until very recently, this is the youngest age statement that Balvenie has released in modern times. So we don't put anything out under a 12-year-old. That has changed slightly. We do have an 11-year-old Hungarian oak that is duty-free only in Europe. It is delicious. If anyone's going over there, I highly recommend picking it up. But what we're looking for is all the vibrance from the distillery. So we want to see some autumn fruit notes come through in there. We want that signature Balvenie honeyed flavor to be embellished by the bourbon cask vanilla notes. We are sitting at a slightly higher ABV. So it might have a little bit of I don't want to say aggression. I'm going to save that for the 16-year-old. We're going to have a little extra sting to it, a little ethanol at the front maybe, but just a beautiful expression for us to see the clean nature of the distillery. If you pick up any phenolic notes in there, that's totally fine. As I mentioned, we do peat the majority of our liquids. Some of these single barrels have it. Some of them I've noticed don't. The beautiful thing with those single barrel programs that we clipped is that they do have their own unique personalities. So whatever barrel we happen to pour this particular tasting will be different to a different cask that we might have pulled 2 years ago and put out into the market. Now, I am very much obviously a wordy individual, but my favorite thing is when it becomes conversational. If anyone has a question or a curiosity around any of the liquids, by all means, we've got a pretty small group that's on here that if you want to jump off mute and ask a question or throw it into the chat. It's been a little minute since I've done a virtual tasting. I think when I was in Singapore, I was doing about 25 a week for about 9 months. So I've had my experience, but again, if you've got any questions or comments even about the liquid, by all means, please throw them up. No, perfect silence. Excellent. The whiskey's perfect. That's all I'm taking from that.
This single barrel was spectacular. And you said you did a revamp on your single barrel program, right? You guys did you had the 15 for a while,
Yep.
the ex bourbon and the ex sherry, and the moment they're gone, they always become collector's items that people are it's always the one that was available yesterday that's the best one ever. But
Yep.
I'm just like after tasting this at our dinner, this is spectacular. I went out and bought a bottle right away.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a great point. We actually removed the entire single barrel program back in 2019. We're doing a total revamp of the portfolio. So I saw a 21 Madeira that showed up on screen just before. The 25 single barrel got taken out. We also removed the 15, the 12, everything got taken. The 16 triple cask got taken out. There was a whole number of things that were removed because for us to put new liquid out there, we need to make sure we're not putting, there it is, 16 triple cask. Amazing liquid, that one. But we're lucky that the fact that we work for a family-owned distillery, it's not up to the shareholders, it's up to the family. If we put enough pressure on them to bring something back, they actually do listen, which is a really fortunate opportunity. I'm seeing a 15 single barrel right there. I'm assuming you're opening that tonight, right? Luke's going to get into some of that and tell us what it tastes like. um,
Stanville, so it didn't happen.
So the wonderful news for us is that they have brought back the 12 single barrel. So the single barrel program is back into life. I have asked about the 15 because that is a crowd favorite across the board and something I'd only in the last 2 years gotten familiar with. Unfortunately, because of the demands on the Scotch whiskey industry currently, we would have to sacrifice some older liquids for us to maintain that, and it wouldn't be for very long. So we'd run out a lot faster. So the family has decided that we're not actually bringing the 15 or anything above for the time being. Now, I was speaking with Charlie, our global ambassador. He hinted without confirming that they might have another conversation in 2030 to give you an idea of like how far down the line we're looking. And at that point, it's not a tomorrow we're going to get more 15 or more 21 or more 25. They're going to revisit and see where we're standing. So very lucky to have the 12 single barrel back in because I think it's a beautiful expression. It really showcases what the Balvenie is at its core before we start adding in those cask finishes at those younger years. So hopefully everyone enjoyed. Delicious food whiskey as well. I'm a big advocate for people playing with meals when it comes to whiskey, be it utilizing the dram as an ingredient or just enjoying it on its own as a pairing with some dish and sort of challenging the chefs that are amongst us.
And on the single cask, I know a lot of the people in this room are very happy with the fact that it's a little higher, a little more umph to it. But I've noticed 47.8, that's like the sweet spot for your single barrels. Why that number specifically?
So it was interesting. I had a gentleman at this auction event I was doing in New York 2 nights ago. He was asking me why we don't do cast strength. So David, I don't know for certain, Brian Kinsman, however, has told me that he enjoys his whiskey at 30% because his palate's so sensitive. So even the Glenfiddich 12, he will cut that down a pretty significant amount for him to be able to decipher tasting notes. Kind of makes sense, like these guys are facing whiskeys constantly, and so for them to bring it down a little notch, they want something softer and more gentle. I think the other side is that for Scotch whiskey, we're not looking to blow anyone's head off. It really is all about when it tastes right. The ton is a great example of this. We could have had that at cask strength because of the blending process between those whiskeys. You're looking at anywhere from maybe 20 up to 45 years being blended in different amounts. But we still bring it down to a certain level, around that sort of 47, 48% for the most part. So it's really about the compatibility with what our bodies can physically tolerate before we start going, oh my God. It's one of the scary things for me moving out to the US has been the generosity of people here putting glasses in front of me and like, hey, try this, it's delicious. And it turns out it's like 161 proof something from a barrel in some backwood distillery in the middle of Kentucky that I've never heard of. And they're just trying to challenge whether or not I can stand up to it. And through like weeping eyes going, yum, that's delicious. It's not really the kind of flavor profile for me. I travel with Tums purely because of that fact. So it really is about compatibility with our palates, trying to make whiskey that is accessible for people. We don't need to prove anything to anyone. We've been doing this long enough. I think the distillery speaks for itself. The number of people that tell me that Balvenie 14, especially in the US, was the whiskey that got them into Scotch, let alone single malts. So yeah, we tend to stick to that below 50 level mark. We're happy with that. Different from the 12 double wood. Please elaborate.
Well, because you were yapping away, so I figured let me go grab my 12 Doublewood. And the Doublewood, I mean, the nose is just so much sweeter. That sherry cask influence. I mean, when you have them next to each other, it's just so dramatic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of fascinating. I never thought of the 12 Doublewood from being any kind of sherry bomb whatsoever. It's a dram I order many places because it's you're not going to break your bank by ordering a, a, a Doublewood 12, right, as opposed to a Macallan 18 or something like that, right? So, but so I find I'm just finding it fascinating. I mean, they're both very good.
Yeah, I mean, this is where the cask finishing conversation comes in because
Right.
even with the 14 Caribbean cask, you can still make that comparison because 12 to 14, straight bourbon cask, you're not going to get that much more development. It might get slightly sweeter, slightly higher vanilla notes, or, you might get a little less of a distillery character. But as soon as you layer the cask finish on top, it's where it really showcases the value of doing that, especially with younger whiskeys. Um, the 12 Doublewood is just a delightful little whiskey, and I like to describe it. The 14 Caribbean cask is my workhorse, but the 12 is Doublewood is my safe bet. I know exactly what I'm getting with it. It's delivering exactly what I want from a Scotch whiskey. And then as soon as the 12 single barrel comes in, that's a little treat because I don't get that very often.
No, I agree. I mean, it's fantastic. Both of them are.
I'd almost expect the 12 single barrel to be in 7, 8 year old, just in the sense of the intensity. Because if you're comparing it, it's like the 12 is so worn wood leather kind of. I mean, it has softened so much from that secondary finish that if you drink the single barrel next to it, you expect this to be at least 3, 4 years younger with all of just the bite and the pepper and the full bodied everything.
Yeah, having had a number of the Balvenie leather labeled eights from the early days, which are in recycled Glenfiddich 12-year-old bottles, funny enough, which at the time would have been 10 or 8-year-olds as well as trying that 6-year-old from 1966. You're exactly on the money. It's funny how bourbon cask takes so long to really get traction going when it comes to flavor development with Scotch. That even at those sort of lower ABVs, we do see that volatility still showing itself through. And as soon as that cask finish comes on, I describe it as 12 years in a bourbon cask to build a nucleus of flavor that we wrap up in a blanket of sherry. And so you get sherry flavors over the top. You get spice, I get beautiful sort of muscatel and raisin notes in there, those dried red fruits in, as well as more of a honeyed sweetness versus a fruit-driven sweetness, which is what I tend to find in the single barrel. So hopefully it was all delicious for everyone. Was that anyone's first time? Is the curiosity for me, because if you're discovering this, they're great drams. I think the last time I had a look, they're like $1 or two less than the 12 Doublewood as well, surprisingly. Given that we don't release that much of it in comparison to the 12 Doublewood, but just beautiful whiskey and a great place for us to start off for sort of where we're moving with the rest of the tasting. Which is what a segue. Look at me go. So from there, we're going to go from, I guess, what we can talk about as quintessential David Stewart into what I like to call a bit of a handshake bottle from Balvenie. We've got two of those. The 12 Sweet Toast of American Oak and then also the 16-year-old French Oak are both what I like to describe as these handshake whiskeys. The reason behind that is we now have a new malt master. It's no secret. We've been talking about Kelsey for a number of years now. Up until 2022, when David sort of mic dropped at the release of the 60-year-old, he was the one that had to sign everything out. But what most people didn't realize is that Kelsey was behind the scenes for a long time. So Kelsey joined the distillery back in 2014. She is having a hell of a couple years. Took over from the single most experienced malt master in the game in 2023. Later that year, she got married, and she's currently on maternity leave because she had her first child. So again, Kelsey's had a couple big years. Now, thankfully, she knew the kid was coming, and so she's planned ahead. We have a couple expressions that will be released over the course of her maternity leave that Brian Kinsman from Balvenie will basically just be quality controlling to make sure it comes out the way that she intended. But the 12 Sweet Toast of American Oak is a beautiful expression because it was actually a challenge that was put to Kelsey to make a whiskey that spoke to the bourbon consumer. So she made a smart choice. She stuck entirely with American Oak, but essentially this is a 12-year-old bourbon cask maturation that then spends about 4 to 6 months sitting in a charred American oak barrel that we actually make on site. We're very fortunate that back in the late 50s, the family invested in basically building a cooperage that we still utilize today. We're one of the few distilleries in Scotland that has their own on-site cooperage. They do all of the woodwork for us. If anyone is having a bad week this week because you're stressed out about work, have a dram for the boys in the cooperage. There's only 13 of them. They can only average about 1,000 casks a week going from start to finish. And at any given week of the year, if they step outside, be it for a tea break, definitely not a cigarette because you're surrounded by wood. But if they look through the distillery, they're sitting on about 55 to 65,000 casks that are waiting to go through the distillery. So it's about 55 to 65 weeks worth of work that are staring down the barrel at them every single time they step outside. So have a little dram for the boys. Now, we're very fortunate they have this program because our coopers work really closely with our malt masters. So David and a gentleman that we call Mini Cooper S, because he set a speed record, and he's a relatively small statured man, but an absolute beast when it comes to coopering. His name's Ian McDonald. They worked really closely because Ian's been with us, I believe it's around the 56-year mark now. So he joined only a few years after David Stewart did, probably in the first decade that David was on as a teenager. And very much so, it's a case of if you don't have good wood, you will never have good whiskey. So we're really lucky to have this on site. Now, I go back to Kelsey. She was challenged with this idea of making a whiskey that spoke to the bourbon consumer, the American whiskey consumer. And so she wanted to add that additional layer of American oak influence into the whiskey that she was making. So as you approach the 12 Sweet Toast of American Oak, this is what we want to keep in mind. We're looking for an embellishment of sweet spice, things like vanilla's coming through, but with a little extra going in there. I personally get a very subtle hint of campfire smoke in the background of this, more so on the palate than on the nose, which comes from the fact that we're charring the barrels that it's spending time in at the end. If anyone ever has watched the Mega Factories episode of the Jack Daniel's distillery, or you've been out there yourself, you might have seen they sit their casks vertically and they blast a jet engine through them and it fires up and goes up into a big cavity. And, you see tons of smoke coming out at the end, which is a great way for them to do it because they're looking for a different result. For us at the cooperage, our barrels are loaded in robotically. It's one of the few things that they've actually heard of a computer for. And they go in on their side, and so they're toasted and rotated with a flame going inside. So as it does that, some of that smoke will not be blasted out. It will permeate inside the wood itself a little bit more than what we see on those vertical firings. So if you do get a little campfire smoke, that's totally normal. Again, you might not. If you go looking for it, it may be in there. But as you go through this, it should be an embellishment again of those autumn fruits. When we say that, we're talking about orchard fruits. So I hate to riff on the good old Glenfiddich 12, but sort of subtle, more stewed apples and pears than sort of vibrantly picked off the tree and taken a bite into it. On top of that, just that beautiful honeyed sweetness of the Balvenie should really be sort of leveled up. And realistically, we're looking for something that's going to have enough spice that it does speak to a bourbon consumer without really straying too far from being a Scotch whiskey. My favorite question when I'm doing tastings these days is thoughts, feelings, and emotions, but everyone's on mute. And I promise you, my Stanley Cup, while covered in offensive stickers, is not full of whiskey. It is me trying to make sure I hydrate before I get on to my drams. But in for a penny, in for a pound.
So, Brett, I just had a quick question since you mentioned the coopering. So the American standard barrels are just they're brought in on staves then, and they're reassembled to hoggies, or they're just
Sorry, keep going.
no. I was just curious on the process since you have a full-time cooperage there.
Yeah, so my understanding, and the distillery is notorious these days for keeping secrets, but my understanding from chatting with Ian is that they actually bring them in fully assembled. So we work with the Kelvin Cooperage here in the US for our bourbon casks and our rye casks as well. Um, we operate, the last time I was up there, we operate on a 4-year cycle. So if we're working with, say, Buffalo Trace, they'll get a 4-year tenure, and then we'll siphon them out, and we'll bring in maybe Heaven Hill to replace them, and we'll take them out after 4 years, and we'll bring in the next distillery, so on and so forth. But it's every year, some distilleries will be cycled out, some will be cycled in, so we never have a reliance. Now, when we're talking about the virgin American oak casks, we're actually building those from scratch at the distillery. So the guys will purchase a number of American oak staves. We then shape them and completely construct from scratch at the distillery, which is where we'll do charring. We'll still char some of the old barrels if they need to be scraped out and recharred. But the virgin cask that this spends that 4 to 6 month period in will actually be built from scratch at the distillery. We're really lucky that we have an extensive team, 13 coopers. If anyone's been up that way, you might have driven past the Speyside Cooperage. I don't even think they have 13 coopers on site. So the fact that we're still keeping up this sort of very old trade and then getting into a level where it's a blessing more so than a curse, but our team tend to come to Balvenie and they never leave. We've got, if anyone's heard the name Dennis McBain, he's a great example. Dennis has been with us since 1958. He is still working with us. He's not a cooper. He used to be the former head coppersmith. He's also called Dennis the Menace. For anyone that sat the tasting with us out at Petit Trois a couple months ago, I think I told the story about how Dennis on my induction bumped into us and played a joke on me. I didn't know that Dennis in his late 70s, early 80s was the joker that he is. But I asked a question about caramel coloring, E150A, do we use it? How much do we use? Does it do any impact? Because I was still new to the industry. So he ran off and found a vial of it and told me to taste it. And so I did, not realizing I'm drinking straight food coloring, and ended up with stained bright orange teeth for the next 3 days. So all of my distillery photos on my very first time going there, closed mouth smiles across the board. And then I had to go host a tasting with Struan, our global ambassador in in Sweden, a couple of days later. So Dennis and I are friends and foes, but we're very lucky that the Coopers, they come to the distillery, they tend to stick around and they master their craft. If you ever get interested in it, we did a beautiful collaboration with Tony Bourdain a number of years ago. I think it was 2016. It's all available on YouTube, but there's a few interviews with Ian McDonald. They end up at the Highlander just down the road in Craigellachie. And I'm pretty sure that's one of the ones where there's footage of Ian. I think Ian stands maybe 5'4". Maybe I'm decreasing that every time I talk about him. But I've watched Ian walk up to a 500-liter sherry cask and tip it on the side one-handed and then drive it like a truck through just absolutely manhandle the thing. No care in the world, just chatting away the entire time, but just throwing this thing around. We could literally ship Ian around the world inside that cask. And he just constantly just knocks him around like there's nothing happening on. He's an amazing guy. Never shake his hand because he's just swung a giant iron hammer for about 55 years. So he doesn't know his own strength, but small but mighty is a great way to describe him. But yeah, they do everything when it comes to the cask.
Got it. Thanks.
Sorry, that was a very long-winded way of getting to the point that I was making, but
Yeah. No,
19 years.
it's great. Yeah, I figured with a staff that size, that's why I wasn't sure if they're coming in whole, and so it's all being matured in American standard barrels, and then the opportunities to do virgin oak barrels they'll take advantage of and whatnot.
Yeah,
Uh,
so I mean, our team are very much capable, and I've seen them do it. They'll bring in, let's say, again, like a Maker's Mark cask will come in, for that specific day, they're trying to get, let's say, 300, or that week, they're trying to get 300 hogsheads off the line. So what they'll do is they'll add staves into those existing barrels, which means maybe those are taken from casks that maybe had too many fractures or too little in the wood left. They'll take those out, they'll keep them, and so if they're making a hogshead, they can just expand it because it's a Scottish creation. They'll just do as they please. But if we're declaring that it's a first fill, that is a bought-in, established barrel, raw craft in there. Jason's all over it, my man. That's a great series, by the way. Everyone highly recommend you go in there. I'm pretty sure he gets tattooed in one of the episodes. He was that committed. Um, so they'll bring them in. If it's first fill or second fill, we're talking about established bourbon or rye casks, anything that is a standard barrel. If we say virgin American oak, that is made on site from scratch. Same thing if you're talking Glenfiddich 15 Solera, the virgin cask that goes into that is made on site, even though it's just a 6-month finish of 15-year-old bourbon cask.
Perfect.
Any other questions before we keep moving to my workhorse of a whiskey?
How many times do you guys reuse barrels? It looks like a lot of first fill bourbon, but do you do second fill bourbon? Second
Yeah,
fill.
we do a good number of second fills as well because it makes up some volume, right? So if anyone remembers, 6 years ago, the 17 Doublewood. 17 Doublewood is slightly softer than the 12, and it's not because of the age, it's because a bit of that whiskey goes into second fill versus first fill, which is why we don't talk so much about it. On top of that, the sherry cask that we use for the finish is actually second fill from the Doublewood finish. So we'll finish in Doublewood, and then it would progress to finish 17 Doublewood. The understanding I've had is that we will go as high if we're trying to do volume for higher age, which is not very often, up to 4 times, but it has to be short periods that it spends in there each time. The vast majority is going to be first fill. It's just going to progress down depending on how many times you use it. At fourth fill, it's going to be pretty spent. And more than likely, a fourth fill is actually a third fill virgin. Which is a really bad way for me to say that. I apologize. That sounded worse than it should have. And now it's worse because I pointed it out.
And then I was looking at the triple cask, and I remember this was a question I've had for years, and I'd never asked it. The triple cask 12 and the 16 were always duty free exclusives, and I've always wondered what the 3 casks are because it says first fill bourbon, Oloroso sherry butts, and then traditional whiskey casks. What are traditional whiskey casks?
It's going back, I believe, and this is my understanding because I haven't looked at it, given that our travel retail, as we call GTR internally, is a totally segmented part of the business, and they are full of mysteries and money, because it turns out that's quite a lucrative industry. I've actually never gotten to the bottom of it, but my understanding is a traditional American cask in the world of Scotch is talking about a bourbon cask. So I think it's going bourbon to sherry back to bourbon. And why that is, I don't know, but it makes delicious liquid. That 16-year-old is delightful.
It's great, but so it's just ex bourbon twice. So
Yeah, that's my understanding. We have a new Glenfiddich. I realize I'm on camera, so I have to be very, very careful about what I say here. We have a new Glen
And comparing the American oak to the single barrel. The single barrel is this thick. It's the honey's almost just honeycomb. It's so thick and kind of dark. Whereas with the American cask, I don't know if it's that it's the slight difference in proof adds more water, but it tastes almost like honey water. So it tastes sweeter on the
Sure.
tongue than the first one does because it's more has a very highly concentrated sugar water flavor.
Yeah.
Is that just the proof, or is that something actually different from the what you're doing with the American oak itself while you're trying to bring in the spice?
It's a really good question. I usually answer this by asking how long is a piece of string? There's so many variables that could be a part of that sort of conversation. Yeah, I think that the ABV is going to play a part, right? It's going to thin it out on your palate where you're not going to get any viscosity sort of curling up. But I say that if you've had the opportunity to try a 25-year-old, that's at 48%. And the way I describe that is it's like dipping a spoon into honey and pulling it off and watching it fall off the end. So when it hits your tongue, it curls up on itself and slowly releases, and that's at high proof.
Hmm.
With that said, though, that's got a lot of sherry cask going in there. So um, again, how long is a piece of string? Yes, it could be that. The honey note that I get on the 12-year-old single barrel for me is more of like a heather honey, which is quite a specific thing to sort of comment on. I didn't know that there was different forms of honey other than the one you squeeze out of a bottle up until maybe like 10 years ago and started doing tastings of it. But heather honey has a bit of a thinner nature to it because it's got this sort of fruity, borderline vegetal note that comes through as well from the fact that it's exclusively pollinated from heather flowers. The honey that's in the 12 Doublewood for me stems a lot more from that sherry cask. And so you get that density, that viscosity. It sticks to your tongue a little bit more. But realistically, it might just be the fact that you're getting a whiskey that technically is younger. It doesn't have the extra 9 months in there. It doesn't have the additional barrel, which is why it feels a little bit more thinned out. So yeah, I thought Heather honey was honey that belongs to Heather. You know what? Maybe it is. Maybe it is. Maybe she's got possession on the market. Monopolies are a thing these days. All right, should we move on to my workhorse, the good old 14-year-old Caribbean cask? Plenty of things for us to unpack within the Caribbean cask itself. A whiskey that we've had in the portfolio for a good number of years now. It is very important for us here in the US for Balvenie as well. The reason being, I found this out early last year. If you if you took the combined portfolios, and I'm looking up because I'm trying to find the answer to this. If you took the combined portfolios of, I believe, Talisker, Dalwhinnie, Aberlour, Highland Park, Glendronach, and there's one more that's going to slip my mind. Balvenie 14 for us in the US sells more than the collective portfolios of those distilleries combined. It is a monster for us, and I think really good reason why. The liquid itself, as much as I talked about the 12 sweet toasts being built for the bourbon cask consumer, the 14 Caribbean cask has that beautiful extended sweetness, and it has that additional spice note that comes through that really speaks to that sort of bourbon consumer's palate before we even had the sweet toast. Now, one thing, and again, I'm leaning on that cooperage line for us. Mini Cooper S, Ian McDonald, got a little bit frustrated, is my understanding from the research my colleague Ross did down in Australia, where a number of years ago we used to release a lot of rum casks, but it was specifically from this rum distillery or that region. Now, if you've ever come across the 17-year-old rum cask from Balvenie, that is specifically using Appleton Estate Jamaican rum casks. We were purchasing from their distillery, shipping direct to ourselves. We were putting whiskey in there, letting it finish, and putting it out into the market. The problem with doing something like that, and that's not the only example, but the problem with doing that is the Caribbean's a pretty volatile region. They get all of the hurricanes. It's very humid. It's hot. And they're also not looking to keep those casks for, say, 30, 40, or 50 years. And so it's almost a turnover sort of market for the use of those casks, keeping in mind they're also previously used bourbon casks. So Ian approached David McDonald. And again, this is going to be my version of the version I was told, which is a version of someone else's. But David was approached by Ian, and Ian explained to him the inefficiencies of, let's say we brought in 100 casks from the Caribbean, from whatever distilleries it was, whatever regions it was. 100 come in. The coopers have to take every single one of those 100 casks apart, inspect them, repair them, or entirely throw them away if they weren't good enough. Then put them all back together, make sure they're sealed, make sure they're approved, pressure tested, and sent out. So let's say 60 out of 100 we're actually good to go. That's a 40% loss that we're taking care of. And it's not a financial thing, it's just the expenditure of manpower that was going into this. They just couldn't keep up with the demand. So Ian approached David Stewart and he said, look, Davy boy, you're getting pretty good at this whole liquid blending thing. We've never seen you blend a rum. Why don't you go and blend a rum profile? I'll get the guys at the distillery in the cooperage and we'll make some virgin American oak casks. And what we'll do is instead of buying them in, we'll make rum casks at the distillery. So I believe even to this day, we have the only rum bodega in the entirety of Scotland, which is a heavy flex on the industry. Now, basically David was like, yeah, okay, I mean, that's a good point. Makes sense. And also he's not the argumentative type. Again, after he's had 7 or 8 Guinnesses, maybe a different story. But I'll get to the Guinness thing in a minute. I have a story about that. But David went off and essentially what he came back with was a proprietary blend that we exclusively use for the 14-year-old Caribbean cask. We don't use it for any other rum cask profile that we use in the entire company. So if you try Glenfiddich 21-year-old Grand Reserva, different rum goes into making those casks. If you go to Tullamore Dew over in Ireland, totally different rum goes into that. It is blended purely based on the taste profile and DNA of the distillery, which is a really special thing for us. Just going to sell this in. If anyone happens to be going to the Tales of the Cocktail this year, I'm actually doing a cask finishes masterclass where we're going to be sampling new make spirit, the 12 single barrel, the 12 double wood to showcase the development there. We're then going to do a distillery sample of cask strength 14-year-old American oak before we taste the Caribbean cask. And then those that are in the room will get the opportunity to try the rum that we season the barrels with. So, sales pitch over. We bring this rum in. It has to be a minimum of 4 years old. We don't care about the provenance. It's all about the blend to make sure that it tastes the way that David designed. The guys at the cooperage will make virgin American oak casks. Rum will go in for 6 months. We season the barrel, take the harsh edges off, probably adds a little sugar into the mix as well. We then take it out. We'll dry it because we like dry barrels over wet aging. We'll put 14-year-old bourbon cask in there. 6 months later, we bring it out. That goes on to become Caribbean cask. So we'll cut it down to the 43% mark. We're good to go. So a lot more goes on than what people expect when they pick up a $65, $70 bottle of Caribbean cask. It's a really extensive process. I also realized I just quoted a 12-year-old. I think it's $85 to $100. I'm a brand ambassador. I just throw the corporate card down, close my eyes, and sign the check. Everyone else in the company makes money. We're just here to spend it. So, it is what it is. Now, as you get into this whiskey, what I recommend, if you have a Glencairn at home, I should have explained this before, but it took me a while to understand this. I know everyone's a seasoned drinker. My favorite way to enjoy this is nose in, but then I breathe gently through my mouth and it vacuums the flavor into my nasal passage versus inhaling any of the vapors. I know people do the hand trick where they throw some here, breathe it in, rub it on their neck. I know the old fish out of water tasting where you put it on your tongue and start chewing on it. Everyone's got their own way of doing so. That's my favorite way to nose. When it comes to tasting, I do a tiny sip at the start to make sure my tongue doesn't repel, and then I go in and start looking for flavor. With this, anytime it's a rum cask, I start describing it as a journey whiskey. So it should start rum forward. For me, it then goes bourbon-esque in the middle, and it finishes a little bit drier as a single malt because out of the 3, single malt's going to be the driest of the 3. What do I mean by that? On the nose and on the palate, we should get beautiful, viscous, sweet vanilla notes, a little bit molassesy, bringing in that 4-year-old Grand Reserva rum, a lot of caramel and toffee flavors as well. On the nose, it showcases a little bit of tropical fruit, but doesn't really scream what tropical fruit that's going to be. It's not until it hits the palate. For me, it's mid-palate, freshly picked bananas off the tree, a little bit of shaved, slightly toasted coconut comes into play, and then I get cinnamon on the back of my throat as it goes down the hatch, and then it just softly sits there. It sort of embraces your tongue and your sort of mouth in general without coating it. It's not that like run your tongue around your mouth, kind of looking for all the remnants of it. It really just kind of sits there, and all of a sudden you're like, ah, I haven't had a sip in a minute. I need to go back and revisit that. Beautiful whiskey for cocktails as well. In fact, the three that we've just gone through, all three of them have a lot of relevance into that. So if you're an at-home mixologist, my least favorite term as a former bartender, because it makes me think I'm meant to be mixologizing versus bartending. Makes an amazing, amazing espresso martini. My favorite term that I've learned since coming to the US. I was in Texas. I got told that a cocktail that I made was a porch pounder, which is the best description I've ever heard for a cocktail that you want to sit out on the terrace or out on the porch and just nail one after the other. Stop making it by the singles, start making jugs. Porch pounder for me with this one is a classic Daisy breakdown. So 45 ml, ounce and a half of 14 Caribbean cask, about a half an ounce, maybe a little over of an apricot brandy, lime and sugar. Shake it up, throw it in there. Batch cocktails, porch pounder worthy, 100%. Jane gets it. But if you make that in mass, all your friends are going to start showing up your door a little bit too much. So just be warned. It is a delightful, delightful thing. It was 100 degrees yesterday in New York. And the only thing I was thinking about was Balvenie daisies.
And sky high humidity.
You know what? I used to live in Singapore. The humidity didn't.
Okay.
But
No,
I'm with you. It's a lot more than here.
we were in New York last week, and Ilana just came home today. I'm just kind of like, no, get me back to LA, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I flew from Aspen to New York. Aspen was bone dry and about 100 degrees as well. So I went from one extreme to the next when it came to humidity, but it was just weirdly consistent across the board when it came to just me being hot and thirsty. So, I had to cure that somehow.
Wait, I'm taking notes. You said ounce and a half of Balvenie 14, half an ounce of apricot brandy. What else you got?
Half an ounce, maybe a little over if you're feeling like you like stone fruits, and then it's just about a half an ounce. Again, I'm a little stuck with this because I'm used to talking in milliliters.
Give me
But
milliliters. I'll convert it.
right, so 45 ml Balvenie, 20 ml apricot brandy, peach brandy or peach liqueur, either side works really well. And then about 20 ml lime and 15 ml sugar, maybe 10 if you don't want it so sweet. It's basically a margarita spec, just using Balvenie and apricot brandy instead of tequila and Cointreau.
Use that
But
Leopold brother three-chamber peach.
there you go. I'm a Luxardo guy for my apricot brandy, but that's just because they sell it across the road at the liquor store. I'm
We
a
just
big
happened
fan.
to do a tasting with Leopold, what, a month ago?
Yep. And you said half an ounce of sugar, just plain simple syrup.
Yeah, 10 to 15
15,
mil.
15 mil.
It depends on if you got a sweet tooth. But I promise you, try one. I like them served up. Maybe ice chips in there if you want a little bit of that sort of texture to it that might dilute very quickly. But it's a banger. I took my housemate, the Hendrix ambassador, Sarah Berardi, down and we did a photo shoot, and that did not last much longer than 5 minutes before she just had to grab it and throw it down the hatch. So we're in a good spot with that one.
Where's home for you, by the way?
So I live in Marina Del Rey. So if you hear the sirens, it's because I am just off the corner of Lincoln, and they've been going by. And if you don't hear them, I do. Very good. All right. We're going to keep moving. By the way, you're all at home, and as I said at the very start, possession, 9/10 of the law, or something along those lines. It might get a little bit stronger as we get into it deeper. But our next whiskey is one that gets me really excited because I've mentioned a couple times, I used to be based out in Asia. Singapore, if you haven't been, has two temperatures. It's either hot or it's hot and raining. There is nothing in between. There's no grievance to it. If anyone says they're cold, it's because it's hit maybe 85. It's a really intense place to go drinking. But the weird thing out there is it really, really screams Scotch whiskey when it comes to the consumer market. So I was out there for about 4.5 years. We started a program called the Distillers Library, which is an invite-only space for exclusive collectors. We're selling anything that goes from essentially the stories, maybe the 19 snuck in, but about the 21 Red Rose and beyond. When we first launched it, we released the 54-year-old Ladyburn Edition 1, which was a single sherry cask that we bottled back in 2021. It's part of the family's private collection because Ladyburn Distillery closed in 75. We've got maybe a little under 200 casks left. They did a partnership with a very famous Vogue photographer from the UK called David Bailey, who is not a relation of mine, sadly, because I would be sitting in a much nicer apartment. But essentially, it was a collection of either 11 bottles that you purchased. There's only 10 full sets available. It was 175,000 pounds to start. Single frame started about 15,000 pounds. So some decent juice was coming through there. Now, the problem with that is there's a cultural element that came into play of, can you drink the big sherry bombs? Can you drink this? Can you drink that? Are you going to stand up to us? My thing is, being an Australian guy sitting in Singapore at 100% humidity and 100 degrees every single day of the year, if I see a single bottle of sherry coming my way, or sherry cask whiskey coming my way, I start sweating just thinking about it. Now, the 16 French Oak was released in 2022, and I got super excited because this, for me, if it's your first time trying it, welcome to your new life. If you've tried it before, keep this in mind. It's got the excitement of a sherry cask, but it doesn't have the weighed down body of a sherry cask. So I laugh because I used to get in arguments with my old brand manager, a gentleman called Arturo. Now, Arturo is exactly 1 day older than me. So he was literally born to work for the company, but the funny thing is he doesn't drink scotch. I used to get in arguments with him because I used to sit next to our Hendrix ambassador in Singapore and our Monkey Shoulder ambassador in Singapore. And maybe once every 2 months, one of them would walk in with their suitcase packed. And I'd be like, okay, where are you off to today? Between the 6 countries we all took care of. And they said, oh, I'm going to Bali. In 4.5 years, the company never sent me to Bali. And I used to ask the question, where's my free trip to paradise? And so sure enough, Arturo's response was, no one goes to the beach to drink single malt. This was up until 16 French Oak came out. And so I tasted it, had a little nose, got familiar with it. And I was like, this is the one bottle that I have the opportunity to prove a point that, yes, they do. So packed up the girlfriend at the time, who by the end of that trip wasn't the girlfriend anymore. It's probably because of the 16 French Oak. We went over to the Philippines. I had a work trip over there. I grew up in the Philippines as well. So I went and stayed at a friend's family hotel in this beautiful island called Boracay, and proceeded to showcase, is I guess the way that I'll phrase it, showcase the fact that you can sit on a beach in the tropics and drink an entire bottle of single malt on your own while your girlfriend very impatiently watches you send photos to your boss. It is a beautiful whiskey. I don't recommend doing that, by the way, but beautiful whiskey, brings in all the fun, all the joy, all the excitement again of a sherry cask, without that sort of weighed down body. Now, the thing that is unique about this, which we're starting to see a lot more come through, is the fact that it's cask finished in Pinot de Charente. If you're not familiar with that, French fortified wine comes from the same protected region as cognac. But interestingly enough, it was our Miami-based national ambassador for Glenfiddich, Lauren Cousin, who actually pitched this to David Stewart. When it first came through, I thought it was white Pinot de Charente, because as you nose it, I get this beautiful fresh ginger root. It then immediately swaps into this citrus note. I still get sweetness, and then it sort of disappears really quickly. Once you taste it, fresh ginger roots should hit the palate as well. It goes into butterscotch sweetness. I get very specifically like a pink grapefruit, but it's the pith, that white point between the fruit and the skin. So a bit of a balance of the sweetness and sourness of the fruit with the bitterness of that skin on the outside, the oils. And then I hit ginger on the back of the throat, and then this just evaporates off my palate immediately. So the aggression and excitement of that sherry cask comes through without the weighed down note of the sherry cask, because the Pinot de Charente just lends something really unique to it. Beautiful whiskey across the board. If you eat oysters, I've been selling this into a few accounts as I've been traveling around, putting water droppers, but filling them up with the 16. So if you get a fresh shucked oyster, putting a couple drops of the whiskey in there and knocking it down the hatch. Ginger and the citrus notes playing really nicely against the creamy sort of maritime flavors of that oyster. It's just a beautiful food whiskey. Again, handshake between Kelsey and David, because she was a lot more at the forefront of the design of this, but it had to be approved by David before it would go out into market. Was that anyone's first time trying? Jason's first time, Brandon's first time, Michael's. Okay. So for the three of you, thoughts and feelings. A little bit different for the stereotypical Balvenie, I dare say.
Yeah, for sure. This one definitely took a moment to hit, but then there was like that initial pause. It's like, okay, this is a nice start. And then like you said, the pink grapefruit was what I was looking for. And it was like the pink grapefruit, citrusy, really bright fruit, just it's like hit really nice and just sat there mid palate for a nice long time. And then like you said, the finish kind of I wanted it to stick around longer than it
Sure.
did, but I can understand why with the way it was finished that it doesn't stick around as long.
So that's a really interesting note because someone described this one as pouring for them as Moorish. You know, you get to the end of that finish, and you're like, you know what? I need to go back. I need to revisit it. I want more. It's a really interesting dram, and you mentioned it was almost like a borderline muted point at the start. Um, it's something that I'm starting to notice is a bit of a trend for Kelsey is that she's got this capacity to kind of mute things. So before we started, I mentioned that I didn't have any of the drams at home today because I just got back last night. So I'm drinking the 19-year-old sherry cask, and I'm just teasing everyone once more. But the way I describe this is that it's a big sherry bomb that hits a certain point, but then it mutes itself and it starts to just kind of go, you know what? I've given you enough. I don't need to scream. I've sort of showed you what I wanted to show you, and now I just need to level off and just kind of hang back. So it's interesting that you described that without me having to.
No, I mean to me, I was kind of surprised how sherry it was.
Okay.
It was
Well,
just
to be fair, there is Oloroso that goes into the 16-year maturation, but it's just a small percentage. So if that's shining through, it's great.
no, I mean for me it on this sip it definitely does. And I don't do a ton of French oak, but I've actually done, I think, did Angel's Envy or one of the bourbons. I'm not necessarily a bourbon guy generally, but I've had one of those and in French oak, and I really like that. So I was looking forward to trying this one again. This is nice.
If anyone's curious, what is, I'm just good at setting up my own segues. If anyone's curious, we do have, it's very, very limited now. I'm not sure how many cases are left in the state in California, but we released an 18-year-old Pinot de Chiron as well, which is vastly different to the 16 that we have in the glass today. The 18-year-old spends 7 years, so it's an extended finish after 11 years exclusively in a bourbon cask. And the disparity between the two, you know, with this, we get this vibrance, this sort of juvenile pop out of the glass. It wants to give you fresh citrus and fresh ginger. The 18-year-old, same cask style, same maison as far as I'm aware for where we're securing them from. But the 18-year-old is more viscous. Christmas cake is what it's been described as for me before. There's a lot more sort of depth to it that lingers on the palate a lot longer. And it's a limited edition. It is called the Curious Casks. So it gets confusing between that and the 14 that we're going to try in a little bit.
Yeah, this one somehow it's like drinking whiskey, but like someone is making mulled wine in the background
I like it.
because it's there and it lingers, but it's not the focal point. I mostly taste the whiskey, but there's this lingeringness.
Yeah, wine notes are a really difficult thing for me to find unless it's like a heavy punching red. I had a Syrah cask that my predecessor in Singapore for Glenfiddich had left around, and I tried that. I was like, it just tastes like whiskey, man. Like I don't get those winey notes. But anything fortified, I feel like David has handed down to both Kelsey and Brian the talent to kind of pull the nuance of that through, where you do get those notes in the background. So I love it. Jane, we've seen a lot of typing from you. I haven't heard any thoughts. You can't have blue hair and not jump off mute.
Oh, I have thoughts.
I bet.
Yeah, I usually just let everybody else chat. Unless nobody talks, then I'll talk. But no, I'm a huge fan. I've liked all of this, and I'm sort of staring at the 16 going, but but I don't have one.
You know what? These problems can be fixed.
Yes, that's true.
No, I think this is a really cool one for us to have come in, because the one thing that I've noticed from the company over the last maybe 2.5 years is we're seeing a lot of limited editions coming in. As far as I'm aware, the 16 oak French oak is going to be available. So I'm really glad about that, because I do a lot of food pairings. When we were at Petit Trois, there was food pairing going on there. That is pretty much where Balvenie sits in a happy place at the moment. And this is a whiskey that I've put up against a few things. My happy place with the 16 French oak, if you're looking for it, is going to be fresh seafood. So sashimis, fresh shucked oysters, things along those lines that allow the whiskey to really shine for the vibrance that it has. But I've also seen this go up against heavier dishes as well. And because it's got higher ABV, it cuts through. And the good news is it's not going anywhere. So happy days all round. We're all good with that? I'm seeing nodding heads. Perfect. Excellent. So,
Before we get to the 21 dessert special, can you talk a little bit about the what you're tasting, that limited range that came out a couple of years ago with the pretty label that like it came and went and nobody ever talked. It was during the pandemic, so there's nobody around to talk about it.
This is a part of the stories range, the stories collection, if you will. It's a little confusing, but there's 10 volumes, I guess is the best way to describe it. The problem is there's a number of chapters in those volumes. So the 14 Curious Cast that we'll try at the end is the most recent of these, but there's 4 different bottles that actually fall into that, which are the chapters that I'm talking about. The stories started, in fact, with the Sweet Toast of American Oak that we tried before. Each of these is about a story to do with either a person, an event, or the history of the distillery. So the one that I'm holding here, the 19-year-old, funny enough, this is actually Kelsey's first flying solo whiskey. It's a 19-year-old Oloroso sherry cask. I don't know if this light's going to do it justice, but it is rich. It's deep. It's 100% Oloroso. I get to brag a little bit that I gave feedback on some of the test examples, and she actually did listen to the ambassador team and curved a very slight astringent note. But the company initially started in putting this into play because they wanted to celebrate individuals at the distillery. So Dennis McBain, Dennis the Menace, that played the trick on me, there's an example of a 42-year-old called The Tale of the Dog, which is celebrating him and a story from his timeline working at the distillery over 65, 66 years. My favorite whiskey of all time that we've ever produced is about to go on my glass. This is the Balvenie 21-year-old Second Red Rose. It has nothing to do with the fact that it is an Australian Shiraz cask finish, apart from the fact that it made it super delicious. And I'm pretty sure it's from my hometown in Australia, in Adelaide. I'm pretty certain this is Barossa, but I should backlight this. I'm going to swing my little light that I've got here to see if it picks up the color for you guys. Nope, just turns it white. But let me do this. It's this beautiful red hue that comes in. It's absolutely incredible. All of that is natural coloring that comes off of the fact that it's been a Shiraz cask. But this is talking about the story of the Balvenie Castle that sits right above Stillhouse number 3 at the Glenfiddich, sorry, which is now the single largest stillhouse in all of Scotland. And the Balvenie Castle housed a woman called Lady Margaret Douglas. Now, her husband was murdered by, I believe it was King James VII, and they were living in the castle at the time. And to apologize, he said to her that you can keep living here, but you need to pay rent, and the rent every year will be the perfect red rose. And so for the rest of her life, she actually lived at the castle, and it's historically documented she was there, and the rent she had to pay was to go out and secure the perfect English red rose. So this came from, again, it was a development after the first red rose that I mentioned at the very start, before I think we started recording, of the auction that's happening in Boston at the moment, which was a 16-year-old port pipe that was discovered that had this incredible red rouge kind of tinge to it, that we released. It was only available at the distillery. When this came about as a concept, it was to release an opportunity for those that couldn't make it to secure that. It went out into a slightly higher production level beyond 237 bottles. And sure enough, the Red Rose was born into multiple chapters. So I am very fortunate that I get to have my hands on these. The company allows us to hold some for some tastings now and then. but they're few and far between. But I would be amiss if I didn't pour myself a nice little dram and enjoy it on all of your behalf.
We appreciate your
Someone's got to
sacrifice.
do it, right?
We appreciate your sacrifice. Thank you.
Hey, you know what? Putting my body on the
Read
line.
between the lines. Read between the lines.
Is that what the Italians keep saying to me?
Yeah.
Very good.
Okay.
All right.
Fair enough. We just all jealous. Let's be honest.
Look, I believe it. And you know what? Understandably.
What,
Absolutely understandably.
what is
Uh,
the official flagship, the actual flagship bottles for Balvenie? Is it double wood, 14 Caribbean cask, and 21 Portwood? That's like the
yeah,
standard line?
that's our focus.
Okay.
21's a great segue into the luxury division, as we call it internally, which is talking about moving into your 25, 30, 40, and 50. The 21 for me is just an incredible bottling.
We should
You
try
know,
it. That sounds really good.
oh, look, are we doing segues?
Segui.
The thing for me, right? I've been I like to describe myself as a spoiled brat, but at least I'm self-aware. When I was out in Asia, I had some very, very generous clients. And so I've had a gentleman in Bangkok that I used to go visit. It's really wonderful. I think it was 70 to 75-year-old man who he got into whiskey about 4 or 5 years before I met him. And he liked it so much that he purchased the international distribution rights for Thailand for Gordon and MacPhail so he could get his hands on whatever he wanted. Um, just a good guy. So I don't think I sat down with him without him maybe pulling out 5 to 9 bottles every time, and I've never had a whiskey with him below 50 years. He is that guy. It's not about the money. It's not about showing off. He just his kick was getting to share the experience with people. With that said, though, my personal profile ceiling for the whiskeys that I enjoy, 30 years and below. At that point, I'm losing any of the distillery character. I understand the value of a 40, 50, and a 60-year-old. But when it comes to drinking whiskey, because those are, look at them on the shelf for a number of years, find the reason to open them. I used to be a bartender. I like getting out there. I like sharing drams with people, getting amongst it. So 30 and below is really sort of where I sit. That 21-year-old Portwood that's in your glass is just such an incredible whiskey, given it's not going to cost you $500 to get your hands on. It is relatively available. It's not going to be everywhere, but you should be able to find them with some form of ease. And it's just the juice just screams when I'm trying to induct someone into understanding the reason for spending that extra cash to dial up to a higher mark. It's the bottle of choice for me across the board. And if that wasn't enough to sell you on it, I've asked David Stewart this twice. The first time was in 2020 when I first joined the Balvenie team. It was on a virtual call like this. We were doing COVID distillery tours where the team in Scotland had suddenly discovered technology and internet. So they were walking around on hillsides with gimbals, wondering how the hell to work them all. They did a great job, but I was hosting some media guests from Malaysia. And sure enough, they're on a hillside, and I had David in the background. It was the first time I'd ever actually chatted with him. And the one question I always used to get after such a tenured period with the distillery, what is the best whiskey he thinks he's ever made? The first answer he gave me was very company man. He didn't know me, and so he wanted to make sure the face was on. He said 12 Doublewood, put the distillery on the map, really established the idea that we kind of kickstarted the whole cast finishing thing, and it also pays our salaries. I was like, yeah, look, David, that's not the question I asked. Tell me the true story. Like, what is it that made you think that this whiskey was the best, taste profile wise? Without blinking, he said it's the 21 Portwood. And I questioned that when I saw him in October. I was at the Rothes Glen, the beautiful castle. We were hosting some bartenders. And at this point, he was only 5 Guinnesses deep. And so sure enough, he just turned to me and said, 21 Portwood, have you got some? In his mind is the best whiskey he thinks he's ever made across the entirety of his career. So as you go into it, I asked David why that is the best whiskey he thinks he ever made. And he said, look, it's just balance. So balance is a great word to describe it, but it's not going to do anything for me as an ambassador. As you've all now picked up, I like to tell stories and embellish and take you through the journey of every whiskey. And a single word is not going to do that. If I was like, balance, good night, have a good time, and click off, you're going to be left sort of wanting more. So I pushed him a little bit, and David built this beautiful story that I now, every time I try it, think of. of dancers sitting on a stage or standing on a stage, and each flavor profile is the dancer that gets to go forward for a solo and then step back, and it graciously invites the next dancer forward. So you get a bit of red fruits comes through, that steps back, and you get some creaminess sort of waft over, that steps back, some spice comes through, you get some wood come through. It's this beautiful sort of harmonious wave of flavors where I wouldn't describe the portwood as fruit-driven, spice-driven, wood. It's everything, just not all at once. It's a really incredibly designed whiskey. The fact that we've had this in the portfolio since 1997, and it's been so continuously under this idea of this sort of wafty, wavy kind of flavor profile. I often describe whiskeys as linear. Linear sounds really boring, but it comes and goes at the same pace, but you get these unique sort of experiences where the linear side is the average of the peaks and troughs that come through. So a really beautiful whiskey. I've had this in cocktails. I wouldn't recommend doing that purely because I think you lose the beauty of the dram itself. I also look like an absolute asshole walking around in a bar in Phoenix with a copper gilded ostrich egg that it came in that screamed I just spent $65 on the cocktail. So I wouldn't recommend necessarily going that level, but just as a whiskey in its own right, it is just absolutely stunning. Is this anyone's first time? Hell yeah. Richard, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, the last three they just keep getting better. Caribbean Cask is always that's kind of always been my favorite. And then French Oak to me stepped it up a little bit more. And this it's exactly like you said. It's just it's got a subtlety, but all the flavors still kind of present themselves too. And it's just delicate but flavorful. It's really, really a masterpiece.
Yeah, beautiful. Anyone else? John, did I see you put your hand up? That was your first time, or yeah? Thoughts, feelings, emotions? You're gonna tap into the cast behind you?
No, no. Like he said, everything has gotten just a little bit better. I do have a double oak somewhere around here, but I can't find it because we just moved. I searched, but everything's good. This is just getting better and better as I let it sit.
Yeah.
Really, really important point that you just pointed out of letting it sit. So I had never, I'm from Adelaide in South Australia. I didn't grow up there, but it's a big wine region for South Australia and Australia in general. If anyone's heard of the Barossa Valley, you've come across Penfolds, that's on our doorstep. I've never thought up until maybe about 4 years ago about the idea of letting a whiskey blossom or bloom in a glass. The more amount of time you let it sit there, the more it's going to grow without having to cut it down with extra water and whatnot. And a great example of this, again, 2 days ago in New York, there's that auction that's going on. I happen to be in the office, and my brand manager was like, "Right, we need to get some tasting stock for this. Let's go down to the Chamber of Secrets, as I like to call it, because it's under lock and key. And when you get inside that room, there's another lock, and then you get inside that room, there's another lock to get into the cabinet. And we have this incredible, I want to call it a distillery sample. It's in this no-name glass bottle. It's a 1 liter. It's just got a tiny little white label on there. I've had it before in Singapore, and it's labeled as Balvenie Distillery, 1984, and then in parentheses it says 30 plus, and that's all the information that's on there. And when you hold the whiskey up against the white wall or up to the light, the whole thing is green. And so when we tasted this a number of years ago, that whiskey, the cask that it was in had a small amount of iron or copper that made its way inside, and so it tainted the coloring, but it's still very much consumable. Now, I cracked this open in Singapore for the tastings we were doing for our private clients when we launched the Distillers Library back in 2021, not knowing what it was. And I'd messaged Brian Kinsman being like, "What the hell have you sent me?" And he said, it's good to go. You can drink it. I was like, perfect. That's step number one, but what the hell is it? And so interestingly enough, I sat with Charmaine, our Hendricks ambassador over there, who has an amazing palate for whiskey. We cracked it open, we poured it into 2 glasses, and we're like, I don't know about you, but like that smells like an añejo tequila. It doesn't smell like a scotch. And maybe they've bottled up some Milagro and accidentally sent it over to after Paddy's Day or something. Nothing about it made sense. It was 100% second fill bourbon cask. And so we put it to the side. We're like, yeah, I don't know about that one. Like, we can't go into this whiskey room and present a whiskey that tastes like tequila. So we put it to the side. We came back to about 15 minutes later, and this thing had blossomed in these glasses. Most of the time, if I'm doing a tasting, I'll be polite and put it in this. Most of the time, I'm drinking out of Bordeaux glasses if I'm drinking whiskey at home. And so, sure enough, we let it sit in this glass, and after 15 minutes, it blossomed into this like custardy, vanilla, cream, like all these incredible notes of density just started coming out of the whiskey. And it was just wild to be drinking something that was tainted green coloring and bringing that through because it had blossomed and had that sort of moment to just sit there, relax in, get some oxygen, not be so cramped up in the bottle. So great point to talk about sort of sitting into it.
The other note I'd make for the 21 is please tell them to never change the packaging
Yeah.
because for that reason, the white box alone, clients, people, friends recommendation, the 21 Portwood is my go-to wedding present, retirement, big birthday kind of thing because the box is perfect for you to take a Sharpie and write on the outside
Yep.
notes, name, sign. I said, this is the perfect gift. Whiskey is one, it has an amazing whiskey that they will love, but also the box kind of makes it that treasure of you can give this to people and it's just a memory box.
I have two fun facts for you. Number one, fun fact about the 21, it's the only square box that we have in the entire Balvenie portfolio. Um, I don't know why. I've asked this question and no one can give me an answer to it. Fun fact number two is Glenfiddich was the very first spirit brand to do secondary packaging as we now know it. And I researched into why, and as much as the companies tried to scrub that, I found out the reason. Any guesses?
No.
So the reason it was back in 1956, I believe, from memory. It's 1954, 1956. The marketing team at the time, which was probably the family, were like, you know what? Let's put it in a box so that housewives don't have to wrap the whiskey for their husbands. That's the entire reason that secondary packaging came around for spirits was for gifting. It's just it happened to have a bit of a sexist tone at the time, but we live in different circumstances. It was almost, well, it's 75, it was 70 years ago. But that's the entire reason that Glenfiddich did it was so that you could gift whiskey to your husband versus just being like, here, honey, there's the bottle. Go forth and nail the whole thing with your work colleagues at midday in Manhattan. Full of fun facts over here. We can get into it. I could talk 1009 AD Viking battles that came through when the River Spey swelled that year and the Vikings invaded and they went all the way back to Mortlach, which is why there's a Viking battle stone where William Grant is buried still to this day. But we won't go there. We still have one more whiskey to get through, and it's one that I'm sure if you haven't tried it yet, you've wondered why the 14-year-old American oak slightly peated has gone to the back end. I asked a question of Brian Kinsman. I think it was 2019. We were in Cognac in France on a conference. I asked Brian two questions. One was, what's this? I wanted to see if his nose was what it was meant to be. And the other one was, what do you do with the whiskey that's not what you expected that might be bad? Hang on, I realized I pulled this over. We're in party mode for this one. I'm glad John enjoyed that. I said, what do you do with bad whiskey, basically? And he said, you know what? I've never made a bad whiskey in my entire life. I was like, arrogant, but like, sure. And he said, I just hadn't given it to the marketing department to figure out what I'd made yet. And that's essentially what we have in the glass here. So the 14-year-old Curious Cask American Oak was a bit of an accident. I like to think happy accident, but George Patterson, who I like to reference as Hagrid, for anyone was in the room with us in Petit Trois, Hagrid or George is the head of warehousing for William Grant when it comes to our Dufton site. So he handles 1.8 million casks currently that are filled with whiskey. He has license to pull samples from anything, and his main job is to go and pull the requested samples from the casks for our malt masters, Kelsey now, Brian Kinsman, formerly David Stewart. And so he was going through the warehouse. He was pulling samples of bourbon casks that were going to go on to become 14-year-old Caribbean casks. They're all 14-year-old for the package he was going for. And he came across one and he pulled it out, pulled it up to his nose, and he kind of scratched his head for a second and stopped. He was like, that's got some like phenolic peated notes to it, but there's nothing in the registry that says this is just straight American oak Balvenie. So he pulled the one next to it, and that was the same. And then he pulled the one next to it, slightly more faint, and started going through it. And he realized suddenly he had this massive package of whiskey, this parcel that was tainted with peated whiskey, but he didn't understand where it had come from. And so, sure enough, he took him about 3 weeks. He went back through the registers and started realizing that the distillery date 14 years before was the week after our story's week of peat. And what they ended up establishing was that whoever it was that was doing distillation that week didn't end up scraping out the draft, like the remnant materials in the still, washing it down, and then flushing the lines, more importantly. And so what you have in your glass is a single barrel, but we don't know if it's going to be heavily peated, super light, where it's just straight American oak. It might be somewhere in between, which is why we've left it to the end, because we don't know. It might be really light and lovely and just straight bourbon cask Balvenie. I've opened one of these in Boston last year at a conference, and the entire room, you could have been almost tricked into thinking that someone had walked in, opened an Octomore for 5 seconds, and put the lid back on. Like, it's this pungent sort of growth of peat going in, because what we do at Balvenie with our peated whiskeys is we'll make an entire batch of very, very heavily peated. And we declare for the week of peat that it's 5 ppm in glass, it's 30 ppm at grain. But that's because we're blending this heavily peated whiskey in at controlled amounts versus making it just one batch at a time and going through. So the last time I spoke with our former global ambassador, Gemma Patterson, she was telling me that the year that we were chatting, maybe 2019, 2020, they had just done a week of peat. They did 7 batches that went through, and one of them reached over 313 ppm at grain. So this is beating Octomore levels. So what we would do is blend all of the 7 batches together to get an average. We then understand what that is, and we'll take small parcels of that and bring it in with the new make of just a standard Balvenie. So we can control the amount going through. With this, if you're getting heavily peated notes, and I haven't tried the batch that you guys have, so you're going to have to tell me afterwards if I'm full of shit and telling you something that's not happening. There's no peat to this whatsoever. There's a reason for it. If you're getting heavy, heavy peat, it's an abundance. Your room's now filled with that sort of phenolic note. It's because you've got a batch or a single cask that was barreled from the head of that distillate. If you've got nothing in there at all, it's coming from the tail end of the distillate. And we have no control in understanding what's between there because I don't carry around the registry of who was where doing what with what. So a really exciting one for us. It's almost like a choose your own adventure. This is why the party lights are on, is we don't know what's going to happen. I'll set the pyro off after we get through the conversation, but you guys have to tell me on this one. What are we tasting? Jason, you're off mute. You can go first.
So, Brett, fun fact, Jane just ran and got the bottle that we're tasting tonight, and it's cask number 2679, and I happen to have the bottle we tasted at our dinner with you. So you've had this before. This is the bottle we tasted at dinner.
Oh, cool. So this is mid-tier.
Yeah, mid-tier for sure.
The interesting thing though is it's mid-tier because I've tasted it, but again, I've had that one in Boston that blew my head off, which is why for me it's mid-tier. For anyone that's not had Balvenie peated, this might be a step in a higher direction for them. Anyone that is a Lagavulin, Lefroy, Ardbeg, Octomore, this is going to be like, what are you talking about? Like wispy in the back end of it. It's a really interesting one because that night we had a gentleman that wanted different casks so he could do his own comparison.
Yep.
I've sampled a number of them. We were drinking this at sorry, I said that wrong. We were sampling this at Whiskey Live in Paris last year, and we had a number of different casks because we went through that much volume, and people were coming back just to try different versions. So hopefully it's an interesting one. My favorite thing with Balvenie's peated profile is our peat comes from about 20 miles northeast of the distillery, so it's distinctly different to what you get from an Isla peat. We don't get the influx of seaweed, so you don't have that really heavy, heavy medicinal style of phenolic note coming through. But if anyone's a fan of Highland Park, they get a very similar peat structure to us because they get the same heather coverage on our hills up in Orkney. So if you see similarities in the peat structure between us and Highland Park, you're exactly right. So we get more of a floral citric kind of taste profile with the smoke, where it's more pungent on the nose than it is on the palate.
Yeah, when I used to go camping, we'd make I think they're called clafoutis. That it's a fruit pancake,
Mhm.
but you do it inside like a Dutch oven. So when you're making it though, you're using like fresh cherries or cans or whatever you've got. But because you're doing it over the coals exactly, you get some of that smoke, burnt flavor inside the actual pancake. That's kind of where I'm getting with this one is it's if I picked a peat profile, it'd be more like Kulila, the classic
Sure.
just it's smoke. It's not peat, it's more smoke.
Sure. Yeah, I'm with you. Kalila, funny enough, for me, is my favorite value for money Isle of Peat whiskey. Their 12-year-old has got something special in there. That sort of creamy roundness that comes through in it is just magic. But the interesting thing with this, you might have noticed I didn't give you guys tasting notes, like at all, apart from there might be some peat in there. I don't think there's a bottle that I'm less committal to when it comes to giving tasting notes because being single barrel, I don't want someone to be like, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a liar. There's no way of telling what's actually in there. And yeah, sure, I've tried this one, but that was 3 months ago, and I hate to admit it, I've had a couple of drams since then. And so my palate is so blown out, given that we've been doing a lot of trade conferences and everything recently, that sadly they kind of come and go. And I think I've probably had 4 different casks of this since that particular one that we did at Petit Trois, which is interesting. But as soon as you said the number, Vadim, I knew exactly what you're talking about. I knew where that was going. You're going to call me out. Also, just for the sake of it, 21 Red Rose is delicious tonight. Highly recommend. Juicy red fruits, cracked black pepper,
Blah 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 blah.
notes of Australia.
So if we want to get hit over the head, are we looking for a higher cask number or a lower cask number?
That's a really good question. I actually don't know the answer, but
So
I am,
I'm gonna try 2683 right now.
Do it.
you're going higher up. Cool.
Yeah.
I have
That,
cast 9,028.
see, that's the kind of variance we're looking for, Tony, because Henrik, was it you that was looking for the 2 different ones that night?
No, it's Jamshid.
There you go.
I mean,
Um,
it had I been there, I would have.
Right. Let me message Charlie, our global ambassador, because if he doesn't have the answer, I'm shit out of luck. If, what is it? The Curious Cask 14 is higher or lower in cast number, will we, sorry, I shouldn't be saying this out loud while I'm typing.
So
Tony,
I think
Tony, you're finally off mute. What's your tasting note on this one, mate?
So this
I haven't
one,
tasted. Go ahead, Andrew.
the nose on this one is much less. It's also a fresh crack.
I'm getting so much almonds, like young almonds on this. It's so wild. Just all over the place.
It's
And
actually,
nobody asked me.
Mine is
All that while we wait for the response. No, Brandon, come back. We're gonna do a photo. We're gonna trying to get Eladio and look back on the shot. There we go. There we go. So we have this tradition that we do when we do virtual tastings. It was we cheers. Everyone cheers together, and then I take a screenshot of the screen, and then we all had fun. So cheers to
In the party lights.
yeah, raise a glass. Hopefully, there we go. Yes, we're gonna have 100%. I love it. All right, everyone, raise a glass and smile to the camera. Got it. Yeah, thank you all for being here tonight. I hope you had fun. I had a great time, and enjoy this final pour. Tony, please tell us what you were tasting in your number 9.
Mine is peated. It's a very nice peat. I get maybe some leather, some earthiness. It's very, very good. I'm glad I got it.
It's
And
going to be hilarious if
what did
there's
you
no
say your
rhyme or
cash
reason to
number
the cast
was?
numbers.
9,028.
Oh wow, so that's completely different. So that's probably a different year, huh?
It'll all be the same year. This was a single sort of I don't want to say mistake because we don't make those at Balvenie. We are consummate
Happy
professionals.
little accidents.
Yeah, exactly. We just
Thanks,
hadn't
Bob.
handed it to the marketing department that year, and they figured it out for us because they're legends.
This is the 14-year Bob Ross edition.
I mean, what I find interesting, I mean, so this one is 47.8, but I mean it's smooth. I mean, it's delicious.
Yeah, has anyone tried the Week of Pete, the 14-year-old Week of Pete that we brought out maybe 2018, I want to say?
Not yet.
Oh,
I
that's.
think mine's
Do
older
they
than
still
that.
put it out, or is it discontinued?
So we used to do for whoever said mine's older than that, you might have the Pete Week.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
which we ended up in a legal case with, I want to say, Shivas for naming rights because they already had something established as Pete Week. So we moved it. It's now the Week of Pete, which is a part of the stories collection. It's story number 4. If anyone's curious about the stories, by the way, if you've got Spotify, if you type in the Balvenie and you want to listen to those that made it or were involved in the process, good luck with the accents. But they've got 30-minute, 20 to 30-minute podcasts where you can listen to David Stewart, you can listen to Dennis McBain, you can listen to Ian McDonald. All of them will walk through it with Gemma and Charlie, and they talk about the process and how it came to fruition and what it's meant to be and what they're hoping people take from it. They're really
Only 9
interesting.
episodes. You got me
Yeah,
all
yeah.
excited. It's 9 episodes. I'm gonna be done with this by the end of the week.
Well, then you can watch the Bourdain videos and you've got, there's lots you could do.
I'm gonna be. I got all excited. I was like, I have years worth of podcasts. No, I have one trip to San Diego, and then it's like buying a new bottle of something amazing. It's done. Damn it.
When are you going to San Diego?
Tomorrow.
You and me both.
All right. Well, where are you going? Oh, let's talk after.
Yeah, I gotta drive down there for the 7 grand anniversary.
Oh, nice.
I say I got it like someone's twisting my arm. Tempt me with a good
Poor
time.
guy. I'm sorry.
Well, and then anybody who got my Advent Christmas Scotch calendar last year, that had the Balvenie 19 Burnhead wood. So that was peated with smoked heather.
Correct. Yeah. Really, really fun story there is the fact that we have very confusingly David Stewart, the former malt master, DCS, MBE, the big dog. But that story is about a guy called Dave Stewart. And you're not allowed to get them confused if you're talking to him. And I found that out the hard way. So Dave Stewart was our resident archivist and historian for 40 years. And every morning when he got to work, I didn't realize that we were this cool, this kind of chilled out company. He'd get to work, drop his bag off, and he'd go for a wander up through the Conville Hills because I guess that's what you do when you're the historian because there's not that much happening on a day-to-day basis he needs to write down. So Dave would go for this morning walk through the Conville Hills. It's where the springs for Balvenie come through. There's all 7 of them sort of siphoned through this area. And at the very top of the hill, you can see it from the backside of Balvenie is the Burnhead Wood. It's a beautiful forest that's up there. So we got up to the top, the very start of spring, and all the heather had started coming out. And he was sort of looking at that one day. He's like, I wonder if we can do something because it's such a signature part of like living in Speyside is these beautiful rolling purple hills when they come into flower. For some reason, because I guess being Scottish, you do weird things like this. He used to walk around with a big satchel and like a scythe. So he pulled that out and started hacking this stuff up and jamming it in his bag. And he walked down and he went and saw Robbie Gormley, who's our old maltster, head maltster. You'll see if you ever see photos of the maltings, there's an old white-haired guy. He looks about 7 feet tall, flicking the barley. That's Robbie. So he said, Robbie, I got all this stuff. Like, do you think we could like maybe smoke like the barley with it or do something? And he said, I don't know, we'll try. It's free. It's not like we're setting fire to anything. It's going to either do something or do nothing. So let's have a crack. So they threw it into the furnace, and in about 15 seconds, all of it went up. And they were like, well, I guess it's doing nothing. And Robbie said, you know what? Actually, hang on a second. Go tomorrow morning, go and get some more and then come back. I think we can make this work. And so they played around with it for a little while. What they realized was if they dehydrate, I think this is the story, if they dehydrated it and then put it in there when it was on really low flame and then continuously added moisture in there, it would slowly steam because it was hydrated before it went back in. So they'd soak it in some water after dehydrating. I don't know the reason why they did that. Flavor maybe. Put it back in there, and they would spritz like liquid in there to keep it sort of cool enough that it wouldn't just incinerate, but it would slowly steam and send this kind of semi-smoke up through it. So if you drink the 19-year-old Edge of Burnhead Wood, it has this incredibly unique vegetal floral sort of note that comes through it because of the fact that it's got this weird heather steamy smoke that they had to experiment to actually get to the bottom of. Delicious liquid though. Edge of Burnhead Wood. We're green now. Hell yeah. I should have done that before I did the tasting. I'm loving these lights. I just got them in.
I think I'll finish with the Madeira cask.
Good man. The 21 or the 15?
15.
Have you tried it
I've never
before?
seen the 21.
So the 15 is technically the replacement for the 21. That was what we made room for, but it's an incredible whiskey. The coloring on the label is amazing as well. But you're gonna look for like white summer peaches in that one. It's got a really interesting stone fruit profile.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, on that note,
Madeira is the duty-free exclusive, right?
correct.
Is that
Yeah,
correct?
it's one of that and a Pedro Ximenez sherry cask came in around the same time. But Vadim, on that note, I just got word from Sarah, my Hendrix housemate, that she is on the way home from 7 market visits around town, and I have a sneaking suspicion that I'm about to be interrupted. I'm gonna probably have to run.
Okay.
But thank you guys so much for having me on. I'm hoping that was worthwhile. Hopefully you enjoyed the drams, found a favorite. And yeah, I look forward to the next one.
Brett, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. We look forward to having you on next time and in person and virtual as well. Thank you. This was really fantastic. Cheers to you.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Brett.
Thanks, gang.
Survey, survey, survey.
Cheers. Have a good night.